Hey guys, I'm really excited to have a conversation today with my friend and colleague, Jonathan Hewitt. We're going to talk about intellectual capital. We're going to talk about why we think the way we think and how we might think better so that knowledge becomes wisdom for us and for others. Listen up. This is the Arable Leader podcast. I'm Karl Martin, and we're exploring true, brave, kind, curious leadership, leading from your soul. Hey friends, welcome again to the Arable Leader podcast. I'm Karl Martin, and today I'm joined by a colleague, Jonathan Hewitt, who is going to help us explore intellectual capital. You remember we're in the series, The Five Capitals, where we're looking at entrustments and investments and trying to work out how to become the kind of leaders that we would have liked to have had and we want to be. So, Jonathan, welcome, and take it away.
Thank you. It's great to be here. So the first question is pretty simple. Maybe depends on how we decide to take it. But how do you distinguish between accumulating knowledge on one hand and developing true wisdom on the other? So, what in your experience, what's the relationship between the two?
Well, they often get mixed up with one another, but in truth, they're very different things. The way in which I think about it is there are three parts to being able to make great decisions and being able to move in the right direction. There's knowledge, understanding, and wisdom, which probably converts to revelation, which is knowledge. You've got some new information that's come your way. Interpretation of that knowledge. Well, what does that mean then? What does that revelation mean for my world, for other people's world, for the world? And then application. Well, then how do we apply that in contextual ways in a way that makes the kind of difference we want to see come about? And I think wisdom is all three of those parts, but it is significantly bigger than knowledge. You can have a lot of knowledge and not be wise. And you and I have all both met people who are like that, and everyone on the call has met people with lots of knowledge, data points, but very little wisdom in the way that gets applied to their lives. I think, just going on from that, I think wisdom, it comes from time, experience, and humility. Wisdom just comes over time. If you learn to do this revelation, interpretation, application piece throughout time, you become wiser and wiser. And if you're humble enough to know that the first thought is not usually the best thought, and you are not the arbiter of all truth, then wisdom grows in you.
Yeah. So when we're talking about that first step, that revelation step, building the sort of foundation of knowledge.
Yes.
We talk about being lifelong learners, right? Not just kind of learning when you're in school and then spending the rest of your life applying. It's kind of a continual process. So what does that lifelong learning actually mean in practice? Is it, how do you ensure that your intellectual knowledge growth serves something more than just, collecting credentials, doing your ongoing education that you need to do for work, just building information, listening to podcasts. I always talk about like the input versus output. So easy to just constantly be in this world of constant content without thinking about, to your point, the later application thing. So how do we do that lifelong learning in a more robust way?
Yeah, I think starting with that, the thought that wisdom is the goal, wisdom is the pursuit. We got to get beyond just more and more information, more and more data points. And then I guess understanding that we talk about this a lot, Jonathan, nothing grows in a comfort zone. So the rinse and repeat of continuing to pursue the same neural pathways, the same ideas, the same conversations, the same podcasts, nothing's going to grow in that comfort zone. Things grow in what we would describe as a disruption zone or a curious zone or a growth zone. And that requires a lot of wonder, a lot of, wow, I don't know that. I'm not sure about that. And so it's recognizing that there is always more and that more is good to go after. I think I think the acquiring of more and more knowledge. How do you resist just becoming puffed up with data, puffed up with knowledge? Yeah. I think it flows from our understanding that although you are the project, you're not the object. Although it starts with you and it has to go through you, you're not the be-all, end-all, or the end-all, be-all, depending upon how you use that phrase. Knowledge, for knowledge's sake, begets knowledge and puffs you up.
Right.
But knowledge for wisdom's sake will make you more curious, more humble, and then will flow from you and potentially grow everyone around you. And so more information is not the end game here. Greater knowledge that you might apply to the world around you is the end game.
Yeah, and I guess there's an innate relationality to that you can't develop wisdom in a vacuum.
Oh, totally.
Because you need to be able to apply it with the people around you. It's super easy to develop knowledge in a vacuum, to sit in a library and learn, or to be on the bus listening to podcasts all day. But for it to actually mean something in the world, you need to try it within the context. It's the idea of sort of contract behaviors versus covenant behaviors that we've been bouncing around. So that the contract stuff can be technique, it can be individualized, it can be atomized, but for it to actually be covenant, it needs to be relational, it needs to be applied, and it needs to be flexible depending on the environment that you're in. And I suppose that's this place that wisdom can be developed.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it's, the teaching that we would jump to around this is when we talk about the three kinds of people you need in your life: the relational, the covenantal people you need in your life, someone you sit at the feet of, people you look in the eye of, and people who sit at your feet. And the first two are pretty obvious. The third, the people that are sitting at your feet that you're pouring yourself into, have that threefold relationship thing is almost a circle, because it's not just that you're stopping being intellectually obese by pouring yourself into other people. That's part of it. It's that every time you apprentice and grow and pour yourself out and apply your wisdom into the world is a learning opportunity and a growth opportunity, because they are teaching you as you are teaching them, and that's where this intellectual curiosity comes about.
Yeah, and I guess there's in that it is relational, in that you are kind of having to get outside of yourself. There's an innate kind of intellectual humility.
That's right.
That's required for growth. So talk a little bit about that. How does intellectual humility play into this? And I mean, do you have an example for people of your own life when intellectual humilities come in?
Well, I ought to have, oughtn't I?
Well, you've never had reason to be intellectually humble.
No, I have lots of reasons. Well, I think let's start with the concept. Intellectual humility is vital because it opens up possibilities. If you're intellectually humble, you're naturally curious and wonderful. And it starts with the conversations like, I don't know and I don't understand and I wish to know and I wish to understand. And it's also vital because the opposite is intellectual arrogance, which closes things down, shuts things down, denies the possibility of growth. And so the posture of intellectual humility is vital if you want to become wise. If you want to, by the way, the moment you think you have attained wisdom is the moment you lost it. Wisdom is a pursuit. It's not something you own, possess, and gain. It is a constant journey. It's like walking the Munros in Scotland, thinking you've reached that peak, and then you find there are four more on the horizon that you've got to go over. And so, intellectual humility, I think, starts with the understanding that the greatest wisdom that you can acquire is wisdom about yourself. Is recognizing that you're not all that you have a lot to grow, and that there are filters that you use that impact the way in which you see the world, and that you are biased and you have biases, and becoming aware of those influences and the ideologies and the injuries, the reason you show up the way you show up, the reason you think the things that you think, and the fact that you might not always be right, and that the truth is often out there, but it's not always in your hand. And so for me, the understanding that I think the journey has been, and I think it's probably true, let's test this out with our audience. I think it's probably true that the wiser you become in life, the tighter you hold on to a few things, and the looser you hold on to many things. You become more and more confirmed in the things that you're certain about. Mm-hmm. These things I die on a hill for. These things are true in the experience of my life and the experience of others. These have been tested and gone through the crucible. And then these things that I used to put in the same category, I'm not really so sure about, because they are not they're not the tenets of my faith. They are the traditions and trappings of my faith, my ideas. So the journey I've been on, sorry, to answer the question, the journey I've been on is for 25 years. I was a pastor of a church. I was a minister of religion. And, it was going great for me. And then I kind of had a realization that the things that I understood instinctively, and the things that I taught instinctively, and the way I led instinctively, could be applied to a much bigger and wider audience than just the people that showed up when I taught sermons and taught classes. And that required incredible intellectual humility, because I didn't know what I didn't know. I had huge intuition and I think quite a lot of skills around organizational leadership, but I didn't have many data points. I didn't have many certainties. Well, it's because of that study, and it's because of that thinking, it's because of that philosophical model. And so I gave myself to study and to write and to think and to talk about how these things apply across every band of culture. And in order for that to be possible, I had to just sit and listen and humble myself and say, I don't know, I don't fully understand. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but that's where my mind goes to.
No, it's great, and it reminds me of I've been doing some research into the concept of intelligence and IQ testing and all of this stuff, which is really, it's fascinating. The history of it. Kind of troubling in some ways, because in the early development of the idea, it was quite tied in with the eugenics movement and the idea of sort of classifying people for the sake of crafting humanity in a sort of social Darwinist sense.
Oh gosh,
It's these things that we just bandy around now. When you look into them, sometimes it can be kind of challenging, but in the development of the idea of IQ testing and intelligence itself, there was developed a concept of fluid versus crystallized intelligence, and that when you're young, you have a very fluid, elastic capacity for approaching ideas and moving with ideas. That declines over time. Yeah. And what kind of ascends and comes to the fore is a kind of crystallized intelligence. And so the application side of things and the way that things actually work in context is the way that you work as you get older. And that's kind of the interesting thing about like the development of new ideas, is that oftentimes the real innovation and the real breakthrough comes from younger people, because they have the fluid intelligence. But the application of the idea, the commercialization of innovations, needs to come from those who have the experience to contextualize and actually put it out into the marketplace. And so, it's an interesting thing thinking about, all of the way that these things work together, particularly when you're talking about kind of teams, right? And the development of teams and how we can all work together within age diverse environments as well.
It's very, very interesting. And I think, one of the things that I keep, and I might be wrong in this, could well be wrong, but one of the things that I do with a number of the people that I coach is encourage, if you like, crystallized fluidity.
Right.
This left hand, right hand thing, you are going to think in certain patterns and structures, but your ability to continue to be fluid, to continue to be hungry and humble and think outside of all boxes that you've created or been created for you will be, in part, your ability to stay young and fresh, and also in part your ability not to get stuck in patterns of thinking and behaving that will restrict you going forward.
So thinking about the kind of the environment that we find ourselves in today, when we're going out into the world and looking for things to build our knowledge and build our awareness, how do you discern what's actually worth knowing? What's the lens that you use in a world of infinite books, infinite podcasts, infinite lecture series, and online courses, and all of these opportunities to learn? How do you decide what's actually worth it?
Well, Jonathan, I think it comes back to what I said earlier: the knowledge of yourself, self-knowledge, self-understanding will help you massively here. And one of the things that we talk about a lot at Arable is purpose and understanding what the point of view is. And so what I do is say, well, what is my yes? What's the thing that I'm made for? Which is, a combination of my greatest dream, my greatest gift, and my deepest joy, or what moves me, what fits me, what fills me. Mm-hmm. And I do that regularly because I want to keep that forefront of mind, so that the things that I'm reading and the things that I'm thinking and the things that I'm discussing are either bullseye or adjacent to the point of me.
Right.
Because you're right, there are like thousands of different things that I could scroll, look at, read, listen to in any given day that would make me broad brushstroke full of knowledge or information. I'm much more interested in becoming wiser around the reason for my being. And so to me, it's don't become lazy and just become so narrow focused on the thing that you do all the time, so you're not interested in anyone else's thing. Mm-hmm. But I think it's find your yes, defend it with 1,000 no's. If I was preaching right now, I would probably say, what you behold, you become. Which I think is true, actually. Well, what you behold, you become, or what you think about, you bring about. So, work out with the end in mind. What do I want to actually achieve with my life? And then let's focus on learning and growing in those areas and adjacent areas, so that I might become a little wider in my thinking. But there's no value in me, Karl Martin, trying to become an intellectual expert on engineering.
Right.
And how that works, because it's just not the way I'm wired. I'm not particularly interested in it, and it's not going to serve the purpose of my life very, very much. I also think, if I might sort of tangentially move the conversation,
you can move it wherever you want, Karl. It's your podcast.
Well, I'm really interested in the fact that I tend to think in certain ways, and right. You, Jonathan, tend to think in other ways, and other people on our team, like Lydia, will think in a third different way, or Emily will think in another way. And so understanding my predisposition to thinking about things in certain ways will help me grow wider in my pursuit of wisdom. Mm-hmm. And let me play this. I'm an instinct guy. In some forms of this kind of thinking, you would say I was a gut guy. I have instincts about things, and I go after things based on instincts. Right. Other people on our team are emotional people, so they think with their hearts. They feel something around something, and others are rational. They think with their heads. It's data, it's information that's coming in. I think one of the things that we do traditionally is we elevate one over the other. We say, well, whichever we think is the most important. And in fact, you can often tell what kind of person someone is by the way they start their sentences. You ever noticed this?
Right. Yep.
I think this. I feel this. My instinct is, I'll often say that, my instinct is,
there it is.
is this, right? And so I think the key to using that kind of understanding is to dethrone your preference.
Right.
Yeah, it's not all that, just because you think something doesn't mean it is. Apply feelings to it and emotions to it, and you might need to talk to other people. Apply instinct to it. What's the go forward answer? And you might find yourself living in a much wiser way. So even when I'm approaching things that are my yes, I try and ask myself, well, how would someone who's predominantly a heart person, a feeler, be approaching this?
Right.
What are they feeling about this? How would someone who's just interested in data? I think I've grown more aware of and more passionate around getting hard data around things, and not just go forward. Let's make roughly ready, roughly right, go, Karl.
Yeah. And I wonder where you would classify me, but maybe that's pretty clear already, based on my interjections. And actually, so like thinking about
that's the subject of our whole podcast, Jonathan.
Yeah, well, we can talk about that. We can talk about that in episode 2. But thinking, there it is. That's the word. Thinking about the knowing yourself, and applying this whole like intellectual capital development to someone's career. I've talked to a lot of people who are early career, mid-career, sort of like mid-30s, looking at that kind of, they've gotten to kind of manager level, senior manager level. And oftentimes in companies and organizations that have done the intentional organizational design work, you have a choice. You either go down the specialist route or you go into a managerial route. Yeah. I think there's a lot of managers who really should be specialists. Yep. And quite a few specialists who could be really gifted personal managers. Yes. At that sort of inflection point in someone's career, how can they do the self-knowledge work to understand their own proclivity for, okay, do I really want to become an expert, or do I really actually want to work with people and apply my expertise within a team? Yeah, that's a fascinating conversation, and probably without joking, it is a conversation that should be a longer conversation than we have time for right now. Having said that, I think a couple of things are true. One is, I think our organizational structures have elevated experts, particularly in the early days of a career. Learn this, and some of our pop psychology has done it as well. 10,000 hours. Find the thing, pursue the thing, become an expert in the thing. And I don't think anyone's come out deliberately to do this and say this, but we have undermined the idea of being a generalist or a people person, a people manager, and we've kind of removed it to the kind of HR department as being that this is a little specific sector of our organizations, when in truth, I think the greatest leaders are people leaders. They're relational leaders. They're people who make other people flourish. They're people who help experts flourish. And so I would want to change the conversation a little bit and to say, don't underestimate how powerful the generalist gift, the people gift, the ability to read people, the ability to lead people, the ability to understand how to elevate and develop people is. These are, and it's not one is better than the other. These are equal things. And then I would suggest that, you really do some serious business with the purpose stuff that we do, and say, well, what is the point of you? Beyond what other people have said, beyond the pathway that you've chosen, beyond what your university professor told you, what in your heart of hearts and in your mind of minds, if you like,
really floats your boat? What will bring meaning to your life? What is this particular skill set that you have? What brings life to you? Because I don't think many of us, particularly earlier in our lives, actually ask those questions often enough. We get stuck on pathways.
Right.
And that's a genuine cause of frustration, depression, stuckness, stuck doing dead-end things.
Yeah.
By the way, it doesn't mean you don't have to do some things you don't want to do. So one day you can do some things that you love doing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I would advocate for going after a purpose process and saying, what is my yes? How do I move incrementally away from the things that are not bringing me life and towards the things that might bring me life? But don't underestimate the power of the generalists, because the generalists rule the world, by the way. The people run the world.
Well, that's spoken as a people person to another people person, so I'm going to agree with you on that one.
Yeah.
The last thing I think is, as I've been thinking, as you've been talking about, kind of limitations. It's that none of us exist with a perfect capacity for absolute genius. Even Albert Einstein, Stephen Hawking, they have their intellectual limitations.
Yes.
And so in this space where we're trying to build our knowledge, build our relationships so that we can apply these things and cultivate wisdom, how do we fit and accept and hopefully embrace our own intellectual limitations within that space?
Well, I think it starts with understanding you cannot even pursue wisdom on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And that's self-evident. I mean, wisdom is found in listening. Wisdom is found in reading. Wisdom is found in pursuing ideas that are not your ideas. Wisdom is applying those ideas in different contexts. And so, this concept of cultural isolation and the idea of you being on your own, sitting in a room, acquiring knowledge which becomes wisdom is nonsense. So you need others around you. And I mean, to think through Hegel's dialectic just for a moment, if you were to take thesis, antithesis, synthesis, it assumes there are other voices in the conversation. Because the reality is, how are you going to come up with a decent and appropriate antithesis when you're so rooted in your thesis? And so you need other voices to be able to give the opposite view, the other idea, the other concept, so that there might be synthesis of those ideas, so there might be praxis, which enables you to test those ideas in real time and therefore develop the better thesis. And so I would say the reality is you need other people, to reiterate something we say all the time. There is no such thing as an individual. There is only team. And the hunger, honesty, humility that it takes for you to say, I am not complete. I don't have the truth. The truth is something that if we ever find it, it's collective, it's out there somewhere, and needs applied to certain situations. And your willingness to humble and listen and employ others who have differing ideas, and to watch things and listen to things that you suspect you will fundamentally disagree with. I mean, I think this is in many ways the antidote to the polarity and dangerous polarity that we find in our politics today. That we don't listen to people. We assume that not only is our core principle true, but everything that we built around that core principle is also true. And therefore, anyone who questions anything in the hinterland of our idea or our principle is therefore the enemy and should be opposed. It's the epitome of cultural and intellectual arrogance, which means that no one can grow from that position and no one can build the kind of relationships that it takes to create the kind of society that we need. Gosh, that was a political statement.
I agree.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there you go. No, you're right. It's more than that. There's a fundamental weakness at the heart of fundamentalism, fundamental weakness at the heart of fundamentalism.
That's good.
That is, it's a fear that you're wrong. And instead of accepting that you might be wrong and having the intellectual and philosophical humility to grapple with that self-doubt, you put up the walls, and anything that questions your assertion is an absolute threat because you know you're on thin ice.
Yeah.
And so you need to destroy any threat before it gets too close, because otherwise you know it'll break the ice. So once you have the humility to welcome people in and have the dialogue and build wisdom, accept that you might be wrong, then you can move forward. And then you can actually grow a better society. But you need to have the courage to be humble.
Totally. And a lot of what we're talking about around the asking questions of yourself first, you being the project, is about creating a security in an individual that allows them to be vulnerable in these areas. If I know who I am, and I know that I'm both beautiful and broken, and I know that I never meet anyone that isn't also beautiful and broken, and that I'm wrong and I'm right, and they're wrong and they're right, and it's okay. If we get to that point, then we don't become so defensive or so fearful, and we're actually really confident in saying, these 2 or 3 things I will go to my death believing. These are truths for me. There's a whole bunch of other things around those things that are not necessarily truth. They are postures that I've taken because of the lenses that I use, and it's okay. And I'm really open to conversations around all this stuff because I know who I am and I know what I'm for.
This is good. This wasn't on my list of questions, but I'm happy we got there. So, conscious of time, is there anything else that you wanted us to get to in this conversation that we haven't approached yet?
Well, I think I want to. Here's a thought. I want to follow up this conversation, this intellectual capital conversation, with a conversation around the next podcast that we might do, or another podcast that we might do. I've been thinking about my reading, and I've been thinking about what I read, and I've been thinking about who I read. And I'm thinking about it particularly because Nikki and I have just done a radical move. We've moved continent, and I had a devastating decision to make, which was basically which books do I bring and which books do I not bring, because we had one container and we needed to bring furniture. Nikki wanted to bring beds and furniture and things like that. I wanted to bring books and stuff and golf clubs. And I got the golf clubs, but I had to get rid of about 1,000 books, which devastated me. And so the library that I had, or particularly around leadership and thinking and development, is now gone. So I'm in the process of building another leadership library. So this is a plea to you guys out there. If there are books that you think I should read that I might not have read, your favorite leadership book, it could be a biography, it could be psychology, it could be anything that you think would be really helpful. It might even be a novel. Who knows? Anything that would be helpful as far as leadership is concerned, send me direct messages. You've got my Instagram account. Send messages to. We got other accounts that people can send messages to.
Yeah, we do. I'll do a run through of all the different ways people can get in contact.
And if you're feeling really generous and you're feeling really passionate, send me the actual book, and we will. If you DM me, we will send an address where you can send that book to. And what I'll do is I will pick my top 5 and I'll read them, and I'll do a podcast where I review top 5 leadership books, and then we'll have a whole conversation about why they're important, and we'll be curious about it and intellectually humble.
There we go. That sounds fantastic. I'm stoked to see what people send in. So if you do have any recommendations, ideas for books, things that you want to share with the Arable team or Karl, you can send us an email at podcast@arableco.com. It's podcast@arableco.com. You can shoot us a message on our socials. We're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on all the places. Or you can just go on our website and fill out the form there. Just give a book to a pigeon, and I'm sure it'll find its way to Nashville.
Brilliant. All right, my friend. Well, it's been great to have this conversation. It went to places I wasn't expecting.
Well, that's where the best conversations go. It's been great, Karl. Thanks for your time.
You've been watching The Arable Leader with Karl Martin. Subscribe for more episodes with great leaders, and you can also listen to the Arable Leader wherever you get your podcasts. For more resources for leading in a healthy way, visit arableco.com and check out Karl's new book, The Cave, the Road, the Table, and the Fire: